And now we have a special guest with us, Martin Wenner, prominent maker of historical flutes and recorders, has agreed to join us from his workshop in Singen, Germany, to talk about his work and the consort that he made for us that we're playing on all of these recordings. Welcome, Martin, and thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
I guess the one question I have is how you got into this business. And I realized from previous conversations that you originally started out making modern flutes. Is that right?
That's true. I was playing flute and recorder, and when I was around 14, I fell in love with a wooden flute which I bought from a flea market. And I was so enthusiastic that I played hours on that instrument. So after several days, the instrument was completely ruined. So I had to replace it. And this was the start of my career as a flute maker, because then I wanted to start making flutes. And when I applied for apprenticeship, there was nobody who taught to make wooden flutes. So the only chance was to learn making recorders and modern flutes, silver flutes, which I did then.
Yeah. And you still play, I guess. Is that right?
Yes. I'm still in love with the wooden flute.
Wonderful.
And I play, not a lot, because I don't have time actually to practice, which is a big problem. So only on holidays I take my flute with me, and then I practice a lot. And from time to time I play a concert with friends, yes. But not really on a professional base. Say semi-professional, okay?
All right. Actually, when you take a flute, do you have a particular favorite model that you play? Of a Baroque flute, for example?
Yeah, I have a very simple solution, because I'm playing on my Palanca flute, which I made 20 years ago. And I'm a very, how do you say, faithful person. So I play this instrument all the time. And I have played all my concerts with this one instrument. Even I could probably take every day another one. But I know that instrument, and that is very important. I know all the good sides and the problematic sides of that instrument. And this is why I'm able to pick it up and really play it immediately. Yeah.
So there are many models for Baroque flute, for Renaissance flute. I'm curious, how do you decide which one to make, which one to do next, which one? How did you get to explore the one that you've already made? How do you decide on that?
Also, that is a long story. I tried to when I started making flutes, the museums were open in Europe, and like you could go there and play these instruments and measure them. So I did a lot of research, and I had a big list when I started, all the models, Denner and Quantz and Bresson and all the names, famous names, not as famous names, and I made them all. But with time, I noticed also that it is not good to make so many things. It's better to make just a small selection, but then better. And so I decided, of course, about the selling point, which instruments were favored by the musicians. And the other one was which instruments fit into a pattern that we can cover Italian music, French music, German music. So, and I still try to keep, if I say product line, the product line as small as possible, because in the end, it is also like playing the instrument. It is also important to know the instrument you're making. Otherwise, you can't reproduce the character of the instrument. Do you understand? If you have, if you make one day a flute after dinner and the next day a grenze, it is very unlikely that you really follow the ideas of the original maker, which is important, I think.
That gets to the idea of what it's like to actually make a copy of the instrument, or to decide that you understand the characteristics of the instrument and make adjustments to achieve what you believe to be the characteristics of the original, rather than the exact dimensions or the exact patterns of it.
Correct. That is like playing music. You reproduce something. And you have to analyze what is the idea behind it. So you analyze maybe a sonata, you have the music in front of you, and then you try to understand what the composer wanted. And the same is with musical instruments, of course. And if you talk about a grenze flute, there are hundreds of grenze flutes, originals. So which one to copy? Isn't it better to think what Grenze actually wanted in his models? Isn't that better? So I try that. And also then in these borderlines, I have the freedom also to change things.
That's really, that hits upon the sort of the state of the early music movement, which I think began as maybe makers began doing exact copies and trying to reproduce what somebody might have heard. But gradually now we use this to understand the music, understand the instruments, and produce something that's really in some ways, much more authentic than it used to be.
Yes, and it is not possible to copy everything. Even you have the exact measurements. First thing is, it is difficult to reproduce it one-to-one exactly. The second is, the instruments have changed over time. And the third is also, what does a musician nowadays want? And these things have to come together in sort of a product, which then a tool, I would say, a tool which makes the musician happy as well.
So have many things changed between the way they used to make flutes in the 16th century and the way we make flutes now? Is that part of the influence on the way we make flutes?
Yes, of course. The way instrument makers worked in the 16th century, so for instance, your Renaissance instruments, they were at that time, I would say, individual products, made, of course, in small groups, but individually for a specific client. And nowadays we have the aim to make more instruments of the same kind. I give the example, for instance, of the palanca flute. This is a very common and very often used Baroque flute, and it is necessary to produce similar instruments, or nearly similar instruments. So I would say the Renaissance makers were more experimental and found solutions very individualistic, whereas in the late 18th and 19th century, the production went on to a manufacturing, so a bigger group of instruments making together in the same way.
How does that influence you with making instruments today? When you're making Renaissance flutes versus Baroque flutes, classical?
I don't do a big difference. I have my plan, which I follow, for a Renaissance flute as well, like for a late instrument. So these plans and these ideas, over the years, they have changed and get optimized by comments I receive and by experimenting. But the actual instrument, which I then sell, should not be an experiment anymore. It should actually work. So then this is also the reason why it is difficult to make, for instance, a Renaissance flute in a different pitch, because you have to change everything. And you don't know what's coming out. You need several instruments to try to get it the best way. So it's a little bit unflexible. However, it gives in the end the best result, I think.
When you were developing your pattern that you now use for your Renaissance flute consort, what models and what original models or other decisions were you faced with or drawing upon when you were coming up with your pattern?
I was completely confused because I went to museums and saw many instruments. So there were instruments by Claude Raffi, French instruments with a very wide bore. Then there were very narrowed bored instruments. It was a complete disaster. Some instruments I could play, I was able to play, and I didn't understand anything. And then I decided that can't go on like that. And I had also discussions with Rudi Tutz about it, and he said, I write on my workshop door, Rudi Tutz, flute maker, in brackets, no Renaissance flutes. because it is a complete new topic. You come from a later instrument and then go a step forward in time. But I had here around the corner in Zurich, I'm not living so far from Zurich and Basel. So I was in contact with Anne Smith, you probably know.
Yes.
And she was very enthusiastic and helped me a lot. The first decision, and that was, I think, the key to all of that, was to decide the fingering chart. So we looked together at the different fingering charts. That was also chaotic. You know that yourself. But there are some basic ideas behind them. For instance, on all fingering charts, the first octave up to G, inclusive G, is playing an octave on an instrument. From A onwards, the fingerings change in the second octave. So that was the first step, to analyze the fingering charts. Then, of course, I was doing some experiments and instruments, and then we looked at the music and found out that a lot of music actually starts in the second octave and the lower octave is not used. There is music which is going up to F sharp, F, G, A, I don't know what, 3. And that was all completely out of tune. And then the second idea came, okay, I have to decide on a model which I try to copy. And the only idea I had at that moment was to go to Verona. Because these instruments, there are 2 collections there. I can give you more information about that later. But basically there are in one collection instruments which you actually can play. They are restored. And it's a big concert. And it consists out of 4 tenors and 3 basses, as far as I know. Yes. And so I made first straight copies out of that. And then that was the second step. The third step was then to talk to an acoustician. So to get a little bit of know-how. And the fight was for the top register, which was on many instruments far too flat and not usable. So we started then experiments with the cylindrical bore. The bore is in the end cylindrical, but you can of course change it inside at some points. And that is the key, I think, to get a flute in tune.
So you do make adjustments inside the bore. It's not entirely.
Yes.
You make adjustments as you make the flute, I assume.
Yes, correct.
Interesting.
May I talk a little bit about the construction of the flute?
Yes.
Please do.
You know, it looks like a stick and it's very simple. It is outside, it's not cylindrical, you know. Have you measured?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was my big question.
Okay. Inside, it is cylindrical, normally. So the diameter at the top end and at the bottom end should be more or less the same. The flute is conical from the embouchure hole down to the bottom. So the taper is going down and about 2 millimeters or something. And also at the head joint, there is a taper, which is acoustically not important. But of course, here it is important because the wall thickness changes. And then you can, what we did was trying every point in the instrument, which it's to check which role it has. So maybe you know that, or you tried it yourself, if you take a little wire and at the end a little bobble, you say bobble, or a piece of cork or something, and you go inside the bore and you move it upwards and you play at the same time, the sound of the instrument changes and the pitch is flatter. For instance, here at the end, if you, with this little fish, I call it, at this point, it's flatter and it's getting flatter here at the embouchure. That is in the first octave. But if you go to the second octave, you have already more places where the pitch is becoming lower if you go inside with this fish. Does everybody understand the system?
I think so, yeah.
So the theory then is, and which works, if you do exactly the opposite, so take wood away,
Mm-hmm.
you have the opposite effect.
Interesting, yeah.
And if you find the right places, and I won't tell you where, then you can really tune the instrument inside. You don't see anything at the outside, at the surface.
So it seems that it has almost the opposite effect. If you expand a section of the board, actually will make some of it higher rather than you would
Correct.
think if a larger volume would create something lower, but it doesn't necessarily do that. I see.
Basically, it changes the overtone spectrum for specific notes. And then you have to decide, or we had to decide which notes are important and which are not important. And that is always the same problem with Baroque flutes as well. But it is possible then to decide that and make little changes, not massive ones, but little ones.
Is this the same process that you use when you're voicing the 3 tenors in a concert that play in different ranges?
The function of instruments within a concert is a different one. You have the bass, and then you have 3 tenor flutes which look the same, but they can't be the same because I was not able to make up to now an instrument which works fantastic from the bottom up to the top. I don't know why, but it's not, in my opinion, it's not possible. So it's, call it lazy, but maybe it's the most easiest way to decide which instrument works best, takes the top, and the instrument which works best at the bottom goes and takes the third line. With time, I found out that the weight of the instrument is very important, that the lighter weight instruments are better at the top and the heavier instruments are better at the bottom. And I also construct the instruments differently. So I take instruments with a thinner wall and which are lighter than up to the top. So to do the superior, that should be the thinnest and the lightest of all the 3 instruments.
Is there any difference in the voicing of the embouchure for those instruments?
Normally also the superior is a little bit sharper in pitch, just a little bit. And I just in the last 2 years, I also found out that it's better to put the cork position a little bit down at the upper instrument. The voicing itself, I concentrate also more on the upper notes. Especially E3 is terrible, you know that.
Yes.
And that's produced as an overtone of A. And it is very hard to get that in tune, or nearly at tune, or at least in a way that a player can work with it.
We know very well. we struggle with that. Yes.
Yes.
But that's what's interesting to me about the tapering of the outside. That the thinning of the tube toward the bottom is crucial and really makes an acoustic difference. Is good to know. I had thought it was a little like just an aesthetic thing, like the Parthenon in Greece, which has no straight lines. You know, everything is optical illusion to create something that achieves a particular aesthetic result. But it's good to know it actually does something.
So do you see any similarity in, you tried many Renaissance flutes. So do you see that they use similar processes? They're sometimes carving the bore from the inside to make the tuning better, or yeah, what did you see in the original that taught you how to make these adjustments, or is it mostly from a scientific point of view that you knew from talking
I
to
think,
acousticians?
yeah, I think it is mostly a solution I found or I'm doing. I have also colleagues who don't do that. I was talking, of course, to my colleagues a lot about this, and I have seen these corrections on several instruments, but not, unfortunately, not on all of them. So, and especially these in Verona don't show any signs of changes in the bore inside. So we see already the struggle in copying an instrument, yeah, because I have these ideas and they definitely help making an instrument which works well and better, I think, in my opinion. But on the other hand side, you can't see that on these particular originals. I have to say, the instruments I started with, they are you aware of the flutes in Verona? You know about them?
I know about them. I haven't tried them. I haven't looked at them physically, no.
Okay. I would like to introduce you a little bit about these instruments, because it's really, if you are into Renaissance flutes, I think it's the best place to go. I don't know if it's still possible to play them, but at least you could see them. And they have basically two schools there, the Biblioteca Capitolare and the Accademia Filarmonica. Both places are old schools, music schools, and both places have these concerts in possession since the 16th century. So they haven't moved. They were always there. In these places, they even have music which was played with these instruments. So it's a fantastic place to do research. And the instruments in Biblioteca Capitolare are not playable because they are complete full of holes with worms. So you can't play anything on them. But the instruments of Accademia Filarmonica, they are made from boxwood, very hard wood, and they are very well in shape. They're very well kept. And I went to Verona with Anne Smith and we measured the instruments. I put them on a scale to check the weight of the original instruments. That is very important. And yeah, there are, as I said earlier, 4 tenor flutes and 3 bass flutes. And they have the pitch of around A408 nowadays. So you can think then, if the wood is normally changing and it because of the cell structure, the bore becomes smaller, and also the length of a boxwood instrument becomes also shorter in length. So in the end, these instruments were, at the time when they are made, probably even lower than 408, maybe 400 or something like that.
And who, do you know the maker of those instruments that you copied from Verona?
They have, no, it's not clear. At that time, Raffi was the only person who actually wrote a name on his instruments. There was the Schnitzer family, which is very famous. and others, but most of the instruments actually came from South Bavaria and were made there in a big flute making tradition, which is not existing anymore. But it is clear that these instruments are in Verona since 1630 or something. But that is great. So when I went then there, I could play them, and some of them are really playing very nicely and have very nice character. You can't play them very long, but yeah, very open, very, very fine instruments.
For materials, for choice of wood, how do you decide which woods to use when you're making the flutes today?
That is a difficult question, because if I want to have the same result, the same sound result than a boxwood flute, which is 400 years old, I can't take boxwood. But these instruments at that time definitely were made from boxwood and plumwood and maple. And these are my woods I use for the Renaissance flutes. And boxwood is, of course, a very difficult wood to get in one piece, that it is straight without too many knots. You know, boxwood is actually not a tree. It's a bush, and it's extremely difficult to get pieces out of it in one piece. So back to the material. I personally like plumwood very much, because plumwood is easier to get, and it stays normally also straight, more or less, which boxwood not all the time does. And a plumwood also gives a sort of dense but also round sound, whereas maple is a bit fluffy in sound, a bit too light for myself.
I've been told that there may have been many more maple instruments originally, but maple is a favorite wood of worms.
Correct. Maple and that is always also the question, which were the favorite materials. I have made over Baroque flutes a survey about materials, and if you just see what survived, then every second instrument should be made out of ivory. But it's clear that more ivory instruments survive because nobody throws it in the bin.
Yes.
However, box flute doesn't have any value. So you're right. Maple is good food for hungry worms and mold, and plumwood is very hard.
I don't know if we have further questions, but at some point we would love to get a virtual tour of your shop, if that's possible.
Yeah. If we do that, then, well, are you finished with your questions?
It's just one follow-up question about the woods. Do you see, are there any examples of Renaissance flutes or keyless flutes being made of imported woods, as opposed, like we see in the 18th century, as opposed to regional woods? Or is that a later phenomenon only?
No, it is not. I don't know by heart, but I have seen a harder wood instrument, and there are also ivory flutes.
Okay.
There is one in Berlin out of one piece. I don't know, probably a straight elephant, or I don't know how they did it, but it is an ivory Renaissance flute, and it's original. Wow. And it was very, very expensive. It was offered to me, but didn't have the money for that. And it is a unique thing, but it exists. And you know that importing woods started already very early from Africa. And if you see furniture, Blackwood furniture with ivory ornaments is a typical thing in Renaissance furniture. So, but I have, for instance, not seen an ebony Renaissance flute. So if you want to see the workshop, then I think I need to go on another device, because it is difficult to carry around the laptop. So here we are. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Actually, there are some Renaissance flutes which are in process. And some palanca flutes. And a bottle of wine.
I see. I was going to comment on that.
So this is where we solder and do the keys. Yeah, you see that we have a machine to solder.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have some pre-prepared instruments which will be finished soon. So this is like, this will become a bottom part, a right-hand joint of a Granzer flute, more keyed. Here we are. Here we have the special machinery for the recorders. So this is our machine to cut the windways.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Looks very complicated. And this is where we do the labium of the recorder. And then we have an additional room. I switch the light on. So where we have two big lathes. Can you see that good?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
So, for instance, on these lathes, we start pre-preparing the Renaissance flutes. They're actually metal lathes, but we turn the wood round, and also you can see here that we have, for instance, we start next week some Renaissance flutes, and they are still very thick, as you can see.
Mm-hmm.
Too thick. But the inside bore is already, the center bore is already in it. And then in the next step, we will, on that lathe, make them thinner. Okay. Let's have a further look. This is where I normally tune the instruments. So that is work for tomorrow. That is a one-keyed Granzer flute with 3 middle joints. And it's a very small booth. Actually, I have only 2 square meters.
Uh-huh.
Then we have here a room for polishing the keys. If I show you the ceiling, because we have normal light, which is necessary because you can then actually see the surface. So we do also sandpapering of instruments here. And in this room here, we have 2 wood turning lathes. So that the different wood turning lathe is speed, and also that you can work here in any direction and can do the forms easier than on the metal lathe. So these are very big machines. And on this machine, we actually do the drilling of the Renaissance flutes. What else to see? Oh yeah, this is a place where we oil the instruments. It's a big bath. And it's full of linseed oil. Can you still hear me?
A little bit, yes. It's getting a little, but still worth it.
Wood? Can you still hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
this is good.
Okay. So I'm going just to the stock where we stock the wood. And here we are. So this is where everything starts. So you see boxwood trees.
Mm-hmm.
And we store them as complete trunks. And also here, that's all full of boxwood. It's very heavy stuff. So this boxwood you see there is about 3 tons of boxwood.
Mm.
And the other wood we have stored in already in pieces in these plastic boxes here, which you can see.
Mm-hmm.
That is then the grenadilla, or the already round, turned and drilled pieces. Okay, we have seen everything. Okay, I'm going back upstairs. So here we are back.
So maybe one more question, if I may. Do you
Yes,
have a
of course.
favorite? Do you have a favorite part of making flutes? Is any of the stages that you like better than others, or that you enjoy more than the others?
You mean flute model, or the actual
Yeah,
working?
I meant the process, but it could be the model.
The
as well.
process.
What you enjoy most?
Difficult to say, because sometimes I do very rough stuff, like cutting trees. And on the other side, I'm doing embouchures with the preciseness of hundredths of a millimeter to
Yes.
get everything out. So what I most enjoy, to answer your question, is actually the mixture of all that. So on one on one side being scientist to look at things, and on the other side or to make it round or to drill it, which is very to do the center bore, it's very, very noisy, and in the evening I sleep immediately. Or then concentration work. This is all what I really love, this combination of everything that makes my job and my as a flute maker really what I always wanted to be.
Fantastic. Well, that was a fabulous journey into your workshop, and it's really wonderful to see all the aspects of it. It's beautiful. Yeah, it's quite wonderful. Well, Martin, we want to thank you so much for taking this time to give us this absolutely fascinating conversation, and telling us an awful lot about instruments that we need to know and perhaps didn't. I'm particularly moved by, in a way, the similarities between the actual making of instruments and understanding them, and the making of music and understanding them, and it's no different. And it's a wonderful partnership that we have, and we thank you also for making such a wonderful consort for us.
Of course, I thank you very much for this talk as well, and I'm very. It makes me very happy that you use the concert I have made, my concert.
Yes, yes.
The concert, the flutes I have made for you, and that gives me a lot of happiness in my life. That I know that the things I'm making are in the end used, and they spread fun and joy to other people. Yeah.